Hello, good evening, and welcome to Byju's. Let's get started with the January 2017's second week of current affairs. If I'm not audible, please raise your hands. Okay, so I'm audible to everybody. So let's get started with all the important events, issues that dominated the headlines in newspapers and media in the past week. Let's get started with something horrific which happened in Chhattisgarh. National Human Rights Commission, which is a premier human rights body in India, NHRC came up with an interim report. It's not a final report yet, but it's an interim report. And this interim report of NHRC confirms that 16 women were victims of rape, sexual and physical assault by the state police in Chhattisgarh. These rapes took place in October 2015 and again in January 2016. And these horrific incidents should serve as a wake-up call to the state government. Because something very serious charge has been leveled by NHRC against the state government. The interim report states that the state government is vicariously liable for the rights violations of these victims. And now the commission has asked the state government of Chhattisgarh that there are 20 other women. Our officials could not meet these 20 other women, but now you, dear state government, you must investigate and provide relief to the victims immediately. So news of such magnitude should have shaken our political establishment. But beyond a few customary debates in the media, nothing more has been done. So it talks about something very serious in our polity. It talks about that there are some lesser mortals who are there in Indian society, for whom the state does not exist, for whom the state does not care. Now let us look at all these issues one by one, and we will also look at this issue from the point of view of governance. Because your GS paper 2 also talks about something very important called governance. And in these governance, you have an important subject or a topic, voluntary organizations. And I'll tell you how to link what has happened in Chhattisgarh with these voluntary organizations. So what is the issue? The issue is NHRC submitted an interim report which confirms that 16 women were prima facie victims of rape, sexual and physical assault by law protectors, law enforcers, by the police in Chhattisgarh. November 2015, one of India's respected newspapers, Indian Express published a report in its newspaper, and NHRC took a suo motu cognizance of these reports. That means when this matter was reflected in the newspaper of Indian Express, NHRC on its own took cognizance of this report and began investigation. According to the report, women from 5 villages of Chhattisgarh, they had alleged that police personnel sexually harassed and assaulted more than 40 women. And out of them, at least 2 were gang raped. The commission was intimated, and as such, some officials of NHRC went to Chhattisgarh villages and decided to investigate. The situation would not have come to such a pass if the state government had been responsive to previous complaints about security forces. For example, we have seen incident after incident has been reported from Chhattisgarh where these police personnel were alleged to have committed rapes. Not only police personnel, but also vigilante groups in Chhattisgarh. Have you heard about Salva Judum? How the members of these Salva Judum, which is an extra constitutional authority, unconstitutional authority, which was later on banned by the Supreme Court, how the members of this Salva Judum were entering into the villages, thrashing everybody who they claimed were the supporters of the Maoists, and ultimately were also raping the women there. So when the state government took no action against police personnel, against the members of these vigilante groups, ultimately what happened? These members of vigilante group and police parties, they were emboldened. Instead, what the state government did, they painted all the defenders of human rights as sympathizers of Maoists. We saw Binayak Sen was arrested. We saw one of the most respected sociologists in this country, Nandini Sundar. A case was registered against her because it was argued that she is a sympathizer of Maoist and she is also responsible for the death of a tribal in Chhattisgarh. So instead of taking action against the police personnel who were involved in these rapes, tortures, extrajudicial killings, against these vigilante groups, the state government was in return accusing and painting all the defenders of human rights as sympathizers of Maoists and internationals. And that is how, with the support of the state institutions, these members of vigilante groups, they hounded activists, academics, NGOs, legal aid workers, and even politicians were not spared. Then came a bizarre spectacle. What was that bizarre spectacle? Case was filed. Some members of the police force were charge sheeted. These members of state police force were charged with burning down a tribal village. A tribal village in Chhattisgarh was burned, and the members of the state police force were charge sheeted. Ultimately, police, and listen to this very carefully, the police, which is a law enforcer, they turned into lawbreakers. How? The members of the police force, they burned effigies of activists after the CBI charge sheeted the members of state police force. That means this was a bizarre spectacle where our law enforcers became lawbreakers. But interesting thing here is the groundwork in the cases which is now under the domain of NHRC. Beautiful work was done by voluntary organizations such as WSS, Women Against Sexual Violence and State Repression, and Jagdalpur Legal Aid Group. So the question can be in your mains examination, critically analyze the role of voluntary organizations in gender issues. So you will have to quote the pioneering work done by these two voluntary organizations, which ultimately forced National Human Rights Commission in this country to take cognizance of the mass rape, gang rape, sexual assault against these tribal women in this country. So this is the pioneering work done by these voluntary organizations. But not just this. The problem is also with the mandate of National Human Rights Commission. National Human Rights Commission, which is a premier human rights body in this country, at best, what NHRC can do, it can provide compensation or it can order compensation. It cannot prosecute. It cannot order a prosecution against those who have violated the laws in this country. And this is where we have to point out the drawbacks of National Human Rights Commission. So this was the first issue that we had to take up. the role of voluntary organizations in women's issues, and also the fact that our premier human rights body, NHRC, is today a toothless tiger. At maximum, it can only award compensation. It cannot enforce the law in this country. It cannot punish the guilty. So this was issue number one, which shook many people in this country, but ultimately the kind of debate that it should have elicited in the media, it was not done because these were tribal women, which is the unfortunate, but it's the truth. But something else also happened on the night of December 31, when people all over the world celebrated the arrival of the new year. Something shocking happened in Bengaluru. There is a case of, or the alleged charge of, mass molestation that took place at the Brigade Road and in other areas of Bengaluru. Although this mass molestation did elicit a lot of response in the media, so many debates were initiated after this, but not a word was said about the tribal women who were raped by the protectors of the law. But let us look at the issue of Bengaluru molestation. Let's go back to December 16, 2012. A young physiotherapist student in Delhi was gang raped in a moving bus. Ultimately, there was a massive outcry, which forced our executive, our parliament, to make laws, to make tough laws, which will ultimately protect the women in this country. But if we look at the empirical reality today, on ground nothing has changed. Because stories of India's grim war against its women continue to be reported with metronomic regularity. The assault on the streets of Bengaluru is only the most recent. Now it should be clear that outrage, high-sounding speeches, or even the most perfect laws will not make Indian women safer in absence of a thoroughgoing public policy reforms. Laws are not helping. High-sounding speeches are not helping. Shedding the glycerine tears is not helping. What we need is a sound public policy reform in this country. And the government's data speaks for itself. What is the data telling us? The year is 2013, and look at this very carefully and you will understand where lies the problem. 2013, 3,09,546 cases of crime against women were reported to police. This number increased to 3,37,922 in 2014. So there was an increase. But in 2015, the number is falling. The number is 3,27,394. What does that mean? Does that mean that India is safer for the women? No. It means that in 2013, these cases were reported to the police, but when the law changed in 2013, it provided a ray of hope to the women. It created a surge of hope in the women that now we will report our cases to the police and action will be taken by the police against them. 2015, the number fell down, but it doesn't mean that the streets of India are safer for the Indian women. It only means that women in this country no longer trust the police. It means that women are losing faith in the legal system. And the reasons for this aren't hard to find. In 2013, 114,785 rape cases were pending for trial. These are very important statistics. Of these, 18,833 prosecutions were concluded, and just about 27% ended up in conviction. In 2013, despite the fact that new fast-track courts were initiated, new laws were initiated, there are still 137,458 cases which are pending for trial. And the convictions had risen only negligibly. Conviction is 29%. That means the bleak truth is that for a woman seeking justice for a gender-related crime, very little has changed. So what is the solution to this? As a civil services aspirant, you don't have to look at the problems, you will have to provide solutions. Because ultimately solutions is what will give you good grade, good marks in the examination. The path forward is simple. Provided the state and central governments have the will to take it. The first step is making our public spaces, streets, our bazaars, public transport. We have to make these public spaces safer for the women. And there are many ways to do this. But the backbone has to be law enforcement. You have to enforce the law. We saw in the instance of Bengaluru, there were police personnel present. But ultimately they were outnumbered by the molesters, and ultimately justice could not be delivered to the helpless women. So yes, we have to make our streets, bazaars, public transport safer, and the best way to do that is to enforce the law. That would involve greater deployment of police officers, and not just greater deployment of police officers, you have to back these police officers with better training and lighting and surveillance tools. India needs to take a hard look at whether it actually has the capacity to even begin to do this. Just a few days back, we saw 2 Delhi women were harassed by young men. And when police officers went there to protect these 2 Delhi women, they were attacked by a mob. So we are looking at a situation where even the police party is not safe. Police personnel are not safe. And the solution, the problem is that today we have 144 police personnel per 100,000 population. In 2013, we had 149 police officers per 1 lakh people. But United Nations, it prescribes a norm. United Nations tell us that if you have an orderly society, where there is peace, where there is tranquility, in an orderly society, still you need 220 police officers per 1 lakh population. But look at our numbers, 144. The problem is not just with these 144 police officers. The problem is we have these many police officers. And out of these, only 122,912 are women. If we have to extricate, if we have to bury all the ill effects against the women community in this country, we need more women in the police force as well. Another important statement that you can write in your examination regarding this women issue. India can't expect change unless it is willing to invest in this change. That means, what is it that we need? We need enhanced community policing. That means we need radical improvements in training and human resources. Today what we are doing, our constables are hired and they are paid on same scales as we pay unskilled labor in this country. That means if you compare the salary of our constable with the unskilled laborer in this country, there is not much change. There is not much difference. How can we expect that these constables who are paid at par with an unskilled worker, how can we expect them to deliver modern policing standards? And there are only few states in this country, handful of states in this country, which have forensics and investigation skills. So how are we going to book the violators? How we are going to ensure that justice will be delivered to the women when we have a strong absence of forensics and investigation skill in our police force? And also the problem is with the training of the policemen. Don't you think that our policemen are also voyeurs? If I am a woman, I have been molested on a street or I have been raped by an individual, I go to the police and the police ask me uncomfortable questions because they are voyeurs. Kaha haath lagaya tha? How were you touched? So because this humiliation that a woman has to suffer in a police station, they don't come forward to lodge a complaint. This is something that has to change. That means you have to mix law with the society. You have to make civil laws, you have to make gender-friendly laws and train these police forces. And most importantly, any crime against women, and not just rape, any crime against women has to fetch severe punishment. This is what you can write in your examination, in your question answers, and that is what is going to give you good marks, fetch good marks. So this was another important issue that hogged headlines in the past week, and this is something that we have discussed. Let's look at something else. For umpteenth time now, China has blocked that we will no longer categorize or label Jaish-e-Mohammed founder Maulana Masood Azhar as a global terrorist. China has blocked this. We also see that Donald Trump, the president-elect of the United States of America, he has said that we will no longer follow one China policy. That means Donald Trump has said, why is it that we are playing diplomatically very safe by saying Taiwan is also part of China, Tibet is also part of China, unless and until we renegotiate the terms of agreement with Chinese? That means Donald Trump is looking at trade with China. If the trade deficit between China and United States is reduced, then it will be a win-win situation for both the parties. Where is India playing in all this? What should be the future relationship of India with Chinese, with Pakistan, with Russia, with United States? We saw the policy of non-alignment. The World War II was over. The global polity split. Two superpowers were given birth. One USSR, the other United States. Many nations in this world, mostly in Asia and Africa, they decided that why should we align with either of the two power blocks? We will remain non-aligned. We will not align either with the Russian bloc or with the American bloc. And this was pioneered by Indonesian president, pioneered by Pandit Nehru as well, and the policy was non-alignment. But this non-alignment is a myth. Contrary to this mythology of non-alignment, tilting to one side or another has been very much part of India's diplomatic tradition, as well as Chinese. If you remember, although you were not born then, but still if you have read about this, when Mao Zedong founded People's Republic of China, he insisted that Beijing must lean one side. First, Beijing leaned towards Soviet Union, but within a few years, Mao Zedong fought Moscow and leaned towards the other side, which is Washington. Nehru proclaimed non-alignment, but reached out to US when war with China took place in 1962. So 1962, we slightly tilted towards the United States. But in 1971, Indira Gandhi signed a security treaty with Soviet Union. Why India signed security treaty with Soviet Union? Some say it was because America embraced China to alter the regional balance. This geopolitical churn continues even today. Now there is Russia, who has been an all-weather friend of India. Russia has conducted military exercise with Pakistan. Now New Delhi fears that Russia might join China-Pakistan axis. China, Pakistan, Russia on one side, where will India go? Now Beijing is campaigning against Delhi's partnership with Washington. Delhi's partnership with Tokyo is also questioned by Beijing. That means Beijing is not in favorable terms with Japan and United States, and now India's close proximity with United States is rubbing some feathers in both Beijing as well as in Moscow. Now Moscow, China, Pakistan are coming closer to each other. There are many theories about this. Many commentators are providing advice to the Prime Minister Modi, telling him what should India do now. And there are many activists, many experts who say that we should go back to that golden age of non-alignment. Let's not ally with either Russia or China or with United States. Let's be non-aligned. But those who are advocating this golden age of non-alignment, they ignore geography. Considering the current political situation, considering the current geopolitical situation, should India go back to the golden age of non-alignment? Critically analyze. This can be the question in your examination. But those who advocate this, they ignore the imperatives of geography. It was easy to be non-aligned in Cold War between America, who was a distant power, removed from our boundaries, and non-aligned from Russia, who was also removed from India's borders. So it was quite possible then. But now we have the emergence of China. And with China, we are not removed from China. We have a long contested border with India. So that makes it difficult. That means we have to align one way or the other. What is the solution then? But before we can begin about the solutions, let's look at other problems as well, vis-a-vis India and China. Beijing's GDP is nearly 5 times than India's. The military spending of Beijing is 3 times than that of Delhi. In the last few years, let's accept this, India has struggled to cope with Beijing's political expansion. Not only political expansion, the military modernization that has taken place in China, the power projection of China in India's neighborhood, the influence of China on Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and the South Chinese Sea, the influence of China is growing day by day. India's territorial disputes with China have also continued. We have had decades of negotiation with Beijing. But even today, Delhi and Beijing don't even agree on the length of their border. China says that the border is 2,000 kilometers. India says that the border is nearly 4,000 kilometers. That means we don't even agree on the border. It was easy in the past, in the Cold War era, when one power bloc was US, removed from our boundaries. Another power bloc was Soviet Russia, slightly removed from our borders. But now with the emergence of China, with China we have a contested border relationship. What is the solution? This question is further complicated by the disagreement over Tibet. We have given refuge to Dalai Lama. This is not agreeable to China. The China has staked its claim for long now on Arunachal Pradesh. There was a time when China was giving stapled visas to citizens from Jammu and Kashmir and Arunachal Pradesh, giving a stark reminder to Delhi that Arunachal is a dispute, Jammu and Kashmir is a dispute. So what is the problem? Now Delhi has to worry. Delhi has to worry about China's deepening alliance with Pakistan and Beijing's growing power in the subcontinent and the Indian Ocean as well. Let's remember, India has a massive trade deficit with China. Beyond the bilateral and regional relationship, Beijing has been a stumbling block when India decided that we want to enter into NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group. China is blocking this. China is saying either bring Pakistan into this as well or no place for India. And unenthusiastic about India's claim for a permanent membership of United Nations Security Council. China is not accepting that at all. So despite the growing support for India from the United States and many other powers in the world, China has not accepted that India should be given a permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council. To top, India's messy relationship with China now stands in contrast to growing political convergence with United States. We have a messy relationship with China, but we are moving closer and closer to United States. India has a significant trade surplus with America. We have a trade deficit with China, but we have a trade surplus with America. We have a dynamic IT sector, which is connected to American Silicon Valley. America has ended its pro-Pakistan tilt long time ago. There was a time when Pakistan was supported enthusiastically by the Americans. But we have seen that this relationship is also going through a bad phase. So despite the fact that you will read in newspapers that F-16 bomber jets have been given to Pakistan by US, the budget of United States talks about more revenue, more ideas for Pakistan. But we have seen that US has now changed its policy and it has moved towards neutrality. It is neither supporting India nor supporting Pakistan to that extent. Unlike China, America supports India's membership of the United Nations Security Council as well as the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Washington says that it wants to see India emerge as a great power. Why? Because it wants to tackle China. China says that your relationship with India is demeaning our influence in the subcontinent, and we will do everything to block India's rise on the global stage. No policy maker in Delhi can avoid this asymmetry in India's relation with Washington and Beijing. Of course, this is not the end of the story. Despite the dramatic advances in India's relationship with America, there are still people in Delhi who mistrust Washington. They don't trust Americans. Some Indians are also concerned with unpredictability of US policies towards China. There were some people in India who were very happy with Donald Trump. That Donald Trump has said, we don't believe in one China policy. Donald Trump will cut China to size, and in the turn of events, India will be placed up in the global polity. They're making a mistake. Donald Trump is a businessman. When Donald Trump says that we will cut China to size, he can't simply do that. What Donald Trump visualizes is he wants to renegotiate the terms of agreement between China and United States. That means China's trade surplus with America has to be balanced. More and more trade activities should be done between United States and China. If Chinese are able to give it to the United States, then United States will support China instead of India. In this situation, where geopolitics, business dominates over everything else, what is the position that India should take? There can be only one suggestion as of now. For the near future, the emphasis of New Delhi, the emphasis of the policy makers in Delhi should be that let's continue and expand our partnership with the United States. We'll continue to do that. But let us at least try that we will limit or at best manage the differences with China. So this is a very high wire act that we will have to do. Engage with the United States, be proactive in our engagement with the United States, but at least don't threaten the Chinese, at least limit or manage the differences that we have with the Chinese. This simple suggestion would go a long way in building India's prestige in the global committee of the nations, and ultimately India can focus on its own pressing problems, which is corruption, which is climate change, which is poverty, malnutrition, and other aspects. So this is something that we need to talk about, considering the fact that China has once again blocked the designation of Masood Azhar as a global terrorist. Let's look at something else. Keep the questions coming. I'll answer them at the end of this webinar. Mesentery just got a major update. For over 100 years, mesentery was thought to be a disjointed, set of tissues randomly distributed throughout the intestines. You must have heard about this mesentery, which was long viewed as a disjointed set of tissues throughout the intestine. Now, two doctors have changed, or at least threatened to change this notion forever. One of the doctor, Dr. Calvin Coffey, of the University of Limerick, this doctor is writing, we are now saying that we have an organ in the body which hasn't been acknowledged yet. If I tell you something, and I will later rebuff that as well, but just for the sake of argument right now, there are 78 known organs in the human body as of now. If mesentery is also viewed or recognized as an organ, the number of organs will rise up to 79. These two doctors are saying, according to their research, they say that instead of being disjointed, this mesentery is actually a single continuous connective tissue. And this single continuous connective tissue is something that attaches the intestines to your abdominal wall. So for over 100 years or more so, mesentery was thought to be a disjointed set of tissues which was randomly distributed throughout the intestines. Now these two doctors, these two researchers are telling us, no, they're not discontinuous. They're not disjointed. Instead, they are continuous, single connective tissue. And because of this tissue, this is something that attaches the intestines to your wall. These doctors are saying that without mesentery, your intestines would slosh around in your belly. What does that mean? That means your intestines, which are coiled inside your body, they would move irregularly in your body, and they will also make a splashing sound when they will move. So if mesentery was not there, your intestines would slosh around in your body. It is because of this single continuous connective tissue that attaches your intestines to your abdominal wall. And these researchers are also making a very tall claim. They say that it is possible that mesentery helped early humans walk upright. If mesentery was not there, humans could not have been in a position to walk upright. Now the doctors want to see if mesentery plays a role in digestive diseases such as Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is basically IBD, or what you call inflammatory bowel disease or syndrome. So at one hand, the researchers, the doctors are saying that mesentery is an organ. They're also saying that it is because of this mesentery that intestines are held closer to the abdominal wall. They're also saying that because of mesentery, it might be possible that mesentery helped early humans walk upright. And now we will also have to see that whether this mesentery plays a role in some of these inflammatory bowel syndromes. Now from the examination point of view, where does this mesentery begin? Mesentery begins with the pancreas and then loops around small and large intestines, and thereby securing the structure of small and large intestines. But if I can ask you a question, can anyone amongst you tell me which organization or which body determines what becomes an organ? Which body or an institution or an authority determines how many organs should be there in a body, or whether a new tissue or bone should be designated as an organ? Do you have an answer? When this question was asked to one of the researchers, he answered that this is a fascinating question because we don't know who the final arbiter of that is. Who can decide whether this is an organ or not? There are people who say that if bone is an organ, then we already have 206 organs. There is no body as such that determines what an organ is. But probably there should be a body which should determine and decide what or what not is an organ. So as of now, theoretically, liver is the largest organ in the body, an internal organ in the body, and skin is the largest organ, the outside organ of the human body. So this was another important research that took place, important development that took place, huge research going on, and there were many commentaries on mesentery if you Google the news item. So this was about mesentery. Let's look at something else. NASA, a premier space agency of the United States, NASA announced two missions of discovery. These missions will help us learn about the infancy of our solar system. That means we will get an idea about a period just 10 million years after the birth of the sun. This period, which is just 10 million years after the birth of the sun, we will get an idea about this period because of the two discovery missions that NASA will launch. Let's look at briefly about both these missions. Mission number 1, Lucy, which is also one of the famous poems of William Wordsworth. But here we are not talking about the poem, we are talking about Lucy, the mission which will be launched by NASA in the year 2021. Lucy will visit 6 diverse bodies. These diverse bodies are what we call Trojans. What are these Trojans? These Trojans orbit the sun in swarms. That means if we look at it, they orbit the sun in front of and behind Jupiter. There are 6 diverse bodies called Trojans. These Trojans orbit the sun in front of and behind Jupiter. And these 6 diverse bodies, they are trapped by Jupiter's gravity. We know very little about these Trojans. Some scientists tell us, or astronauts, they tell us that these Trojans may be asteroids, they may be comets, they may be Kuiper belt objects. We don't know. But with the launch of Lucy in 2021, when Lucy will visit these Trojans who orbit around the sun in front of and behind the Jupiter and which are trapped by the Jupiter's gravity, we will get to know about these Trojans, and they will tell us something very fascinating about the time, which is 10 million years after the birth of the sun. And that will be interesting times, and that we can get to know about only when Lucy will successfully complete its mission. Second mission, Psyche, which will be launched in 2023. So you have to be absolutely sure about the numbers as well, about the dates as well. Lucy in 2021, Psyche in 2023. Lucy will visit the Trojan, Psyche will visit something else. Psyche will take us to a very large and rare asteroid. This asteroid is made completely up of metal, and the name of this asteroid is 16 Psyche. Interesting thing about this 16 Psyche is that it is made up of knife. Ni stands for nickel, Fe, iron. The real name is ferrum, so the symbol of iron is Fe. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you read about knife? Do you know that Earth's core is also made up of knife? So scientists believe that this Psyche may have been a planet. That means this asteroid 16 Psyche it may be an exposed core of a planet that was once the size of the Mars. So just like the core of the earth is made up of knife, this 16 Psyche is also made up of knife, and maybe this 16 Psyche is the core of a planet which was once of the size of the Mars. But because of violent collisions, it lost its rocky outside layer. So we will get to know about this very rare asteroid called 16 Psyche when Psyche will be launched by NASA in 2023. But I will give you a question and you will have to answer. And I'll tell you the reason why I'm posing this question before you. Which was the last US planetary mission to Venus? Anyone has an idea? Which was the last US planetary mission to Venus? And the answer is Magellan, which was launched in 1989. But what is the link here? Why I am posing this question? There was a competition, and in this competition, whoever wins, the NASA will launch the Discovery mission to that area. And ultimately, the scientists who were exploring Venus, they lost out of this competition, and ultimately no mission could be selected to study Mars. So the last US planetary mission which went to I'm talking about Venus. So there was a competition. Whoever will win this competition, or whoever will be chosen from this competition, a Discovery mission will be launched to that area. In this competition, the researchers who were exploring Venus, they lost out, and ultimately two missions were selected. One was Lucy, the other was Psyche. Now the researchers who were working on exploring Venus, they are also even today expressing their satisfaction and expressing a hope that NASA will continue to support the missions to Venus. So question can be in your prelims examination, because since a mission to Venus failed to get the support from the NASA, ultimately which was the last US planetary mission to Venus? And the answer is Magellan in the year 1989. Let's look at something else. Elections are around the corner in 5 states. The stakes are high, particularly in Uttar Pradesh. Some people say that elections to Uttar Pradesh is a semi-final before 2019 Lok Sabha elections. Although this is a far-fetched idea, but nevertheless Uttar Pradesh is a very important state for all the political parties that are in contest, except Congress. Sorry for the pun. But Election Commission has given an interesting description today and also yesterday. Election Commission said that sponsored advertisements on social media such as Twitter, Facebook, there are sponsored ads by various political parties and their candidates. Election Commission has said that these sponsored advertisements on social media would also be included in the total expenditure of the candidate. So initially what was happening, if you go through your polity lectures or the Lakshmikant book, you will understand that there is a cap. There is a maximum amount of expenditure that you can spend in the elections, whether to Lok Sabha or to Legislative Assembly. You cannot breach that expenditure, and if you do that, you are liable to be disqualified. Now what these political parties candidates were doing, they were promoting, they were campaigning, they were canvassing, they were asking for votes on social media platforms such as Twitter, Google, and also Facebook, and ultimately they were spending millions of rupees on them, and still they were not included in the expenditure sheet of a candidate. Now the Election Commission has issued a guideline that these sponsored advertisements will also be taken into account and included in the total expenditure of the candidate. Something else. Election Commission is saying that voice messages would also be added to the total expenditure of the candidate. To get away with the law, if I was contesting an election from the UP, I was getting the voice messages delivered from Punjab or the nearby states, Rajasthan or Bihar or any other place. So these voice messages were being received from other states. Even if they are received from other states, they would still be included in the total expenditure of the candidate, and you cannot breach the expenditure limit. Now these political party candidates, they're also printing pamphlets, printing sheets. Now Election Commission has issued a guideline to all these printing press owners that you have to print the names and addresses of printer and publisher of any election pamphlet or poster. That means whenever you are printing an election poster, you have to write down who printed this or who published this election poster. Any violation will invite action, including revocation of license of the printing press. Because if on this pamphlet the name of the printer and the publisher is mentioned, then it becomes easy for the Election Commission to audit. And you can easily point out who provided this printing press owner with the money to print these pamphlets, so that the political parties and their candidates do not evade the law. And today, in a landmark step, Election Commission said, remove photos of Prime Minister, Chief Ministers, politicians in all these 5 poll-bound states. There were posters by the Prime Minister asking the people to go cashless. Many schemes were launched by the Prime Minister Modi, and ultimately Election Commission has come down strongly on them and stated that you have to remove the photos of Prime Minister, Chief Ministers, politicians in all these 5 poll-bound states to ensure that there is a level playing field for everybody. Because model code of conduct is in play, and the very purpose of model code of conduct is to ensure a level playing field for all the political parties and candidates who are contesting these elections. There is also a representation by the principal opposition party, the Congress, and some other opposition parties that budget should be delayed, because the government has said that in order to do away with the prospect of passing a vote on account, you would know what vote on account is. Let's get rid of vote on account and let's prepone the tabling of the budget so that by the start of the financial year, and the financial year starts on 1st April, the appropriation bill would be passed by the parliament. So to do that, the government said we will prepone the tabling of the budget. On 1st of February, the budget will be presented before the Lok Sabha, and ultimately there are people, opposition political parties mostly, who say that budget should not be preponed because there are elections in the 5 states. Budget is an important tool, and this budget can be used to provide SOPs, to provide freebies to the candidates, to the people in these 5 poll-bound states. Election Commission is looking into this request by the political parties. Let's see what Election Commission has to say about this, whether the budget will be deferred or not. Let's wait and watch for that. You please keep a track on that. Let's look at something else. Food wastage. A very beautiful article in a write-up on food wastage was there in the Economic Times. Food loss or wastage. This is a global problem. Happens everywhere in the world. But it's very high in India. Minimizing the food wastage should be taken up as a priority. Let's look at some of the important statistics before we can attribute reasons to them. According to United Nations FAO organization, which is Food and Agriculture Organization, 1/3 of all the food that is produced for human consumption, 1/3 of this food is lost or wasted. That means roughly 1.3 billion tons of food is either lost or wasted. Central Institute of Post-Harvest Engineering and Technology, which is situated in Ludhiana. This Central Institute of Post-Harvest Engineering and Technology estimates that the loss in the year 2012 and 2013 was to the tune of 93,000 crore. Nearly 16% of fruit and vegetables and 6% of cereals were lost. So what is the issue? The issue is that of a food wastage or food loss, which happens everywhere in the world, but it is more harrowing in India, dramatic in India. In 2012-2013, 93,000 crore worth of food was lost or wasted. If you look at individual categories, nearly 16% of the vegetables and fruits were wasted, 6% of the cereals were wasted. And we are talking about a country where food security is still a dream for the people. We are talking about a country where close to 30-40% people are malnourished. We are talking about a society, we're talking about a country where children less than 5 years do not get access to nutritional food. We're talking about a society, a country which is poor. We're talking about a country and a society where rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming even poorer, and these poor people do not have access to food, leave alone whether the food is nutritious or not, whether the food is balanced or not. What are the reasons for this? Reasons are many. For example, just few days back we saw that tons and tons of tomatoes and many other perishable goods were thrown into the rivers and thrown onto the streets because the price of this produce decreased to a great extent because of demonetization. But this is just a seasonal reason for the wastage of the food. The real reason is we are missing processing capacity. If tomato is a perishable good, we should have a situation where many tomato ketchup industries should have been there, or jam industries should have been there, or other processing industries should have been there. This is something that is missing in India. We have them, but not to the level of requirements. Then a major portion of our food is lost because of the transport. We have a system where even today the food is transported from one area to another in trucks, in other vans, but ultimately, since these are perishable goods, they do not survive the humidity, the heat, the rainfall, and ultimately the food is lost, the food is wasted. Similarly, we do not have adequate storage facilities. If we have to ensure that the food is not wasted, we have to provide cold storage facilities to the food grains. Ultimately, we lack them. In fact, when the food security bill was passed, in fact, even before, when FDI limit was increased in the multi-brand retail, one of the conditions put forward by the government was that when FDI money will come into India, these promoters of FDI will have to invest very heavily in setting up these storage facilities. But ultimately, nothing is moving on the ground. So this is something that we have to look at very, very carefully. Because we are a country where 200 million people are undernourished. And if you look at, India ranks 97 out of 118 countries on the global hunger index. So these are interesting times, these are strange times, and these strange times require strange solutions. So what is it that we have to do? What is the way forward? We know the problems. Now we have to look at the solutions as well. Let us look at the solutions. Motorable roads, refrigerated vans to transport food items from one place to another, because we see the abysmal condition of our roads, and ultimately that is also causing delay, and ultimately these perishable foods are perishing. We also need smooth movement of food across the state borders, more and more private investment, more and more state investment also in food processing industry. But one thing we have to keep a very close focus on: most of these food processing industries should be particularly close to the areas of production. If these food processing industries are close to the areas of production, then this will minimize the food loss during the transport. So these are some simple, humble solutions which, if taken into account, it will go a long way in minimizing the food wastage and food loss, and ultimately will help India to provide food to the undernourished, malnourished children and people in this country. Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, MSDE. This ministry has issued the notification for setting up of Indian Skill Development Services. The members who will be, or the officers who will be appointed, will run various skill development and entrepreneurship programs which are launched by this concerned ministry. That means formulation of skill policies, revamping the ITIs in this country, also the fact that we have to revamp various schemes related to skill development. In all these aspects, these officers of Indian Skill Development Services will be taken into account, because we have a target to meet. The target is that by the year 2022, we should have 500 million skilled people in this country. Some years back, Boston Consulting Group did the study of workforce availability in the world by 2020. It came out with a grim forecast. It said that for most part of the world, including China, there will be shortage of working people. India, on the other hand, would have a surplus. So for the first time, we could indeed convert the numbers to our advantage, because we are second most populous country in the world. These numbers are humongous. These numbers are very huge. So we can convert these numbers to our advantage. But there is a catch here. The men we produce must be good at their work. The world would require professionals. The world does not require hackers. So for that, the skill development will play a very important role. The problem today is we have lakhs and lakhs of engineers coming out of engineering colleges. They're not employed. Why they're not employed? Not because we don't have jobs to offer, but the fact they are unemployable. We can't employ these engineers who are coming out of these engineering colleges because they lack skill. So if we have to reap the dividends of this demographic dividend, because we say that we have a population, the bulk of our population under the age of 35. If you have to make this population system into a demographic dividend, we have to impart skills to these people. And that is why a very good step has been taken by the ministry, creation of this Indian Skill Development Services, which will be a Group A service. The examination will be conducted by the UPSC and the induction will take place through Indian Engineering Service Examination, which is conducted by the UPSC. And please don't confuse this with an All India service. Indian Skill Development Service is not an All India service. So that is something that you will have to keep in mind. If it was an All India service, then Rajya Sabha should have passed a resolution authorizing the Parliament to create a new All India service. Then a constitutional amendment should have been enacted to create a new All India service. This is a central civil service. Let's look at something else. December 2016. 23 workers, they were trapped under the debris at Lal Matia open cast coal mine in Jharkhand. Or to be more precise, in the Godda district of Jharkhand. 18 bodies were pulled out, some 19 people died ultimately. But one striking thing, Director General of Mines Safety said that these deaths did not take place because of a complex technical factor, but these deaths took place by neglect of basic safety principles. So what is the issue at hand? The issue is the latest mining accident, which yet again points to neglect of basic safety principles. The Director General of Mine Safety is himself accepting that these deaths did not take place because of a complex technical issue, but because of the neglect. What is the issue now? This accident is not unusual in an industry which is considered to be the most hazardous in India. So if there are two industries in India which are considered to be very hazardous, one is the mining, the other is shipbuilding. These two industries are considered to be the most hazardous industries in this country. That means this incident raises and draws our attention to a host of serious issues related to mining in this country. What are these issues? Number one, abysmal, poor safety conditions for workers. Second, outsourcing by public sector companies to private companies, and these private companies do not follow rules and regulations. Do you need a proof of that? The proof is the incident that took place in Jharkhand. If you look at, the work was part of, I'll write that on the next slide. The work which was given, it was part of Raj Mahal open cast project of Eastern Coalfields. Eastern Coalfields is the subsidiary of state-owned Coal India Limited. It's a public company. But this work, this Raj Mahal open cast project, which was the project of Eastern Coalfields, Eastern Coalfields is the subsidiary of Coal India Limited, which is a government company, but this work was outsourced to a private company called Mahalakshmi Company. That is what I was talking about. That means this accident, which is not unusual in industry, it raises some issues that concerns the safety of the workers. That means, one, our safety conditions for the workers is abysmal. Second, the public sector companies, they outsource the work to private companies, and in turn these private companies do not follow the rules and regulations. In turn, what is happening? This mining industry is not only detrimental to the safety of the workers, but it is also leading to environmental degradation. It is also leading to the violation of human rights of laborers, because there are protests by the locals who do not want to work in these mines because these mines are dangerous. Ultimately, what happens? These private companies or even government companies, sometimes they bring the residents from neighborhood and hire these contract laborers from outside. That means it is also a violation of fundamental rights, human rights. Also, we are seeing that there is corruption in the sanctioning of projects. When the projects are sanctioned to exploit the minerals, ultimately there is corruption there. There is illegal mining also going on. And in these illegal mining, we employ a large number of marginalized child laborers. There are hundreds of reports and documentaries which tell us the tribal population of these mineral rich states such as Bihar, Jharkhand, they live in utter poverty. Many of them are displaced and others are in continual fear of displacement. Huge projects are entering Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, but despite huge investments, massive profits to private companies, nothing is given back to the poor tribals in these respective states. Ironically, if we go back to 1973, in 1973, Coal Mines Nationalization Act of 1973. The government took a very important, a very bold step. Government said, we will take over these private sector mines. Question was asked, why would you take these private sector mines? Government said, these private sector mines are neglecting safety procedures. Not only are they neglecting safety procedures, but they are also in a position that they violate the rights of the people in these respective states. That means when the government took over these private sector mines, and these private sector mines were accused of neglecting safety procedures, what is happening today? That means safety of the workers is not a priority even in the state-owned mines. So one, safety of workers in state-owned mines is not a priority, and at the same time these state-owned mines are outsourcing their work to private companies. So what was the impact of this 1973 Nationalization Act? We have come a full circle. Not only this, Lal Matia tragedy underscores another very important fact, and that is the knowledge of workers is not given importance. These workers are working in these mines for a long time, and now because of their long experiences they have gained some knowledge. Workers in this Lal Matia mine, they had complained to the higher authorities that there is a slope which is formed by excavating earth in this mine. And these workers told the authorities that cracks have developed in this slope, so we should not go about mining. The higher authorities told these workers, shut up and continue doing your work. Ultimately what happened? It led to a disaster. So that means one, the safety of the workers is not of paramount importance to the coal mine owners. It is not of paramount importance to the management of these coal mine owners, and at the same time the knowledge of workers which they have gained by long experiences is not given importance that it deserves. Now both Coal India Limited and the state government of Jharkhand have announced compensation as well as inquiry. This is useless. This inquiry will not tell us anything different. All these previous reports that we have witnessed, because let's not forget, 65 deaths have occurred in 2016 alone because of fatalities in coal mines in this country. 65 deaths alone. So we have seen inquiry reports after inquiry reports, and nothing extraordinary comes out from these inquiry reports. These are all deposited in the dustbins of history. What people need to focus upon is compensation. But here lies another problem. Most of these workers are on contract basis. They are not eligible for welfare programs. They're not eligible for the welfare benefits. That means their next of the kin will not get a job by the government. All they will get is compensation. And sometimes this process of getting compensation is long drawn out, and ultimately the families and the future of their families is ruined. So what we can suggest is that inquiry will take place on its own, but the compensation should be given swiftly to these people who have lost their loved ones in these mines. And apart from that, we can also look at something very, very important. Human Rights Watch, it came out with a report. The title of this report was Out of Control Mining, Regulatory Failure, and Human Rights in India. This report was published in 2012, and this report focuses on iron ore mining in Goa and Karnataka. This report tells us that even mines which are operating with the approval of the government, they violate the law with complete impunity. They say bad policies of the government, weak institutions, corruption, government oversight. All these factors are responsible, and because of these factors, it has resulted in the chaos in the mining industry in this country. The report tells something very, very serious. When mining activities are going on, it wrecks the local farmer. The local farmer's crops are destroyed because environmental degradation takes place, and ultimately the community is threatened with economic and health ruin. That means on one hand, you are threatening the environment, and on the other hand, you are also wreaking havoc on the crops which have been sown by these local farmers. So it is leading to both economic as well as health ruin. So safety measures and sticking to them is the one recommendation that we can give to the government, and at the same time we can plead before the government that work in state-owned mines should not be handed over to private parties. That is the least that we can expect from the government. So the issue was the Lal Matia tragedy in Jharkhand, and we have seen that reasons for this are many. On one hand, the government-owned companies are outsourcing their work to private companies, and these private companies do not follow the rules and regulations, do not follow the safety mechanisms available for the workers, and at the same time it is causing economic degradation, environmental degradation to the local farmers. So what we can suggest is compensation, and at the same time safety measures should be stuck to, and work in state-owned mines should not be handed over to the private parties. Let's look at the last news that we will cover in this webinar, and then we can open up to the questions that you have posed. India has successfully test fired for the 4th time its nuclear capable Agni 5 missile, and there are reports which say that this Agni 5 missile can reach Beijing, much of Europe, and this brings India closer to strengthen its nuclear deterrence. And there are many people who say that the test firing of Agni will give a stiff competition to China, because Pakistan currently lacks an intercontinental ballistic missile. We know that Babar 3 was recently launched, but that is a submarine cruise missile. That is not an intercontinental ballistic missile, but because of this Agni 5, we have a slight edge over Pakistan. Agni 5 can carry a nuclear warhead which can weigh 1.5 tons, and it can cover a distance of 5,000 kilometers. Another important factual information is that this Agni 5 is a surface-to-surface missile. We have a bouquet of Agni missiles. Agni 1, 2, 3, 4, which was also test fired recently, and 5. All of them can carry nuclear warheads. Agni has a range of close to 700 kilometers. Agni 2 can hit a target of close to 2000 kilometers. Agni 3 can travel 3000 kilometers. Agni 4, 4000 kilometers. And Agni 5, as I told you, 5000 kilometers. But why is this significant for India's defense? Agni 5 should get China worried. It has a range of more than 5000 kilometers. That means potentially bringing targets in China within the striking distance. And also much of Europe is within the striking capacity of Agni 5. And at the same time, this Agni missile is an indigenously developed missile. And that is surely going to enhance India's long-range strike capabilities. And currently various tests are going on, and Agni 5 will be inducted into Strategic Forces Command, or SFC. There are also people who have disputed India's claim. Indian scientists are claiming that Agni 5 has a range of up to 6000 kilometers or 5000 kilometers. But foreign researchers are saying that India has downplayed its capabilities. Actually, they say that the range of Agni is 8000 kilometers. After Agni 5 test was conducted, Chinese media claimed that India is underplaying the missile's hitting capability and saying that Agni has a range of 8000 kilometers and can easily hit 70% of Europe. Because you don't want to threaten your neighboring countries, you want to play safe so that some sanctions could not be imposed on you. That is why the Chinese are saying that India is downplaying the capability of Agni 5. Otherwise, Agni 5 is much more disastrous for their strategic interests. And some important thing about Agni 5. It was test fired from a Tatra truck. That means from a moving place, this intercontinental ballistic missile was test fired. That gives a very important second strike capability to this Agni. That means in the first strike, if all the nuclear warheads or nuclear stockpile of the country are destroyed, but since on a moving vehicle this intercontinental ballistic missile can be fired, then it gives India a very important second strike capability. This is something that you will have to keep in mind. That is all for now in this webinar of the past week. Let's meet the next week. Thank you for watching.